Well, if you ever wanted a visual time capsule for 2002, hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today we're going to be continuing my 007 review series with the 20th James Bond film, 2002's Die Another Day. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. Die Another Day stars Pierce Brosnan, Halle Berry, and Toby and was directed by Tamahori. It tells the story of James Bond, who, after being held captive in North Korea, seeks revenge on the mole who burned him while simultaneously trying to stop a solar-powered satellite weapon. 40 years, 20 films, and the Bond franchise was still going strong. Still going. I mean, that kind of longevity is pretty impressive. Unfortunately, this 40th anniversary Bond is one of the worst in the franchise. As with all the other lesser Bond films that came before it, this movie isn't irredeemable. In fact, there are a few things to like about it, but man is this one mostly rough. Right from the gun barrel opening, we get a hint that something's a little amiss with this movie. In addition to our typical shot, blood drip, shake pattern, we actually see a stylized bullet leave Bond's gun and enter our gun barrel. What? And don't even get me started on that theme song. Those underwhelming oddities aside, the cold opening's actually fairly strong. Like its predecessor, it sets the stakes extremely high right from the get-go, presenting us with a perilous situation we've never seen before in the Bond franchise. But, like its predecessor, the rest of the film crumbles in on itself very quickly, never giving us an adequate payoff to what it promises at the start. What begins as a fairly serious toned film about torture and POW trading inexplicably morphs into a goofy yet still self-serious story of technology run amok and evil supervillain plots. It's got a ridiculous plot, but honestly doesn't feel that out there for the Bond franchise. This type of story is reminiscent of the late Connery era or some of the Moore era movies. The plot issues come with the tonal inconsistency. The first 30 minutes of this movie feel completely different from the rest of the film. It's like we get an intense first act from an undeveloped third Dalton Bond, and then the rest of the movie suddenly a weird mishmash of Brosnan, Moore, and the 2000s tech action subgenre. If it had just stuck with one or the other, I think it would have been a lot better. That being said, I think the opening 30 minutes or so are the definite strong point of the film. We see Bond in a pretty dire situation that he's never been in before. It's actually kind of dark, and it all sets up for what could have been a pretty intense revenge-based story along the lines of License to Kill. Plus, that opening sequence provides us with one of the best action set pieces in the movie. I mean, we've seen a lot of chases in this franchise. Foot, car, boat, helicopter, but we've never had a hovercraft chase, and especially not one through a minefield, or I guess over a minefield. But then we've got the remaining hour and a half of this movie that just dives into the most ridiculous, fantastical stuff. Again, this isn't unheard of in the Bond franchise. We've always had the crazy gadgets and the cutting edge, bordering on science fiction technology. It's just that this movie goes overboard with it, to the point where it almost feels like it's trying to parody itself. We've got an over-the-top super-villain-esque antagonist, out-of-control lasers, invisible cars, ice jet rocket cars, absurd futuristic medical technology. We do get a few decent moments, like some fun references to the past 40 years of Bond movies, and a pretty extended sword fight that's easily my favorite action sequence in the movie. But the majority of the film and its story are just so, Even the Bond girls fall into this category, to the point that there really isn't much to say about them. All of that would have added up to a mediocre to subpar film, but we still haven't talked about this movie's biggest issue. Like so many of the other Bond films, Die Another Day is very much a product of its time. Just about every other Bond film in the 40-year span had some aspect that dates it today. Rear projection, blatant misogyny, rampant racial stereotyping, Soviet paranoia, space obsession, questionable music choices. So it's really no surprise that watching the Brosnan era Bonds imparts similar cringe-inducing aspects to viewers today. While the three previous films had a plot over-reliance on technology and some iffy CGI, Die Another Day goes full bore with both aspects. Really? Another satellite? But it's the visuals that are the biggest detriment here. The whole movie has that glossy, overproduced high sheen look to it that many action films of the time did, but it also utilizes a lot of the action sequence visual stylizations that were prevalent in a lot of those movies too, such as an overabundance of dramatic slow motion shots, even at times that don't warrant the use of slow motion. But none of that even compares to the atrociousness of the CGI. Now I get it. It was 2002, CGI's improved a lot in the interim, but even so, it's abysmal. There have been a lot of ridiculous moments and images in the franchise over the years, but the almost entirely CGI shot of Bond parasailing on a tidal wave caused by a calving glacier is easily the most absurd thing I've ever seen in the franchise. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is the setup for this movie. It doesn't really pay off and transforms into an entirely different type of movie, but the opening of this film is actually pretty good. It's got an exciting action sequence that doesn't rely on CGI, and it also offers a dark scenario that we haven't seen in a Bond movie before. The stakes are high, and things are pretty perilous for a while. It sets things up perfectly for a really interesting dark story. It's just too bad it doesn't follow through on it. The second pro has gotta be the Bond references. This movie was a double milestone film. Not only was it the 20th Bond movie, but 2002 was the 40th anniversary for the franchise. And so this movie pays homage to the franchise's history with a ton of little references to the previous films scattered throughout. Fans of these movies will pick up on these Easter eggs, but none of them are shoved in your face in a here's a reference, did you get it kind of way. So they work and feel pretty natural. While in R's storeroom, we briefly see some old gadgets, like the blade shoes from Russia with Love and the jetpack from Thunderball, as well as a whole assortment of other past props. The Aston Martin makes a return, with some pretty significant modifications, as does the Icarus satellite concept. There are some musical cues from the past movies, some dialogue that's lifted verbatim from some of them. We've even got some direct visual throwbacks. A Union Jack parachute, like in The Spy Who Loved Me, somebody tied down awaiting a laser death, like in Goldfinger, and of course, a bikini-clad, knife-toting Jinx emerging from the ocean, just as Honey Rider had in Dr. No 40 years before. On the con side, by far the biggest issue is the CGI. It's so bad, and so overused in the last 45 minutes of this movie. I don't usually like to pick on movies for technical constraints. This film came out in 2002, so we've seen a lot of technical advancements in the 18 years since its release, and I'm sure that in 2038, we're going to be looking back at movies from today and laughing at how rudimentary some of the imagery is. 2002 was on the early side for extensive live-action CGI, but it wasn't exactly in its infancy either. And with the sheer number of planned CGI-heavy scenes, the popularity of Bond, and the budget this movie had, it's startling how poorly done some of the CGI and green screen effects were, even by 2002 standards. The second con is the tonal inconsistency, predominantly between most of the first act and the remainder of the movie. If you had never seen this before and somebody showed you the cold opening and then 5 minutes from any other part of this movie, I think you'd be hard-pressed to correctly identify those two clips as having come from the same film. The opening is so intense and dour, with a deeply militaristic feel, while the rest of the movie turns into this ridiculous super tech-filled story about solar death rays, invisible cars, and melting ice palaces. It's a really strange dichotomy that just doesn't work well as a cohesive idea. I'm gonna give Die Another Day 2 out of 5 paws, and that might be a little generous. It starts off strong, and seems like it's gonna be about on par with the other Brosnan films, but then just goes off the deep end with a nonsensical story and horrible visual effects. I would recommend Die Another Day to really only Bond completionists. If you like the Brosnan era, you'll probably find this a bit less appalling than other people might, but even within the era, it's a big step down. If you like Die Another Day, I would recommend the 9th Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun. That movie was the spiritual predecessor to the Icarus satellite, with, I believe, the only other solar-powered death ray in the franchise. If you like the over-the-top villainy of Gustav Graves, then you might want to watch the 14th Bond movie, A View to a Kill. That one features Max Zorin, another almost cartoonish villain with an equally unique mode of transportation. And if you like this film's opening and wish you had a movie that was a continuation of that style, you should check out License to Kill, the 16th Bond film. It's a dark, revenge-driven action movie that features James Bond going rogue. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Die Another Day? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what movie do you think has the most dated visual effects? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.